I think that meme coins are showing an evolution of where people do place value these days. So what we think of as markets and, what types of assets are really important, I think deviates a lot from where we're moving as a society. And so I actually think meme coins are a great cultural indicator of where value is going to be and where it's been driving. The second part that everybody, obviously, that's all anybody's been talking about over the weekend. I know somebody who in DC who literally said to me Saturday morning, everybody woke up and said, "What's Solana?" So obviously, it has captured mind share well outside of just the crypto world. And given the volume of transactions for both TRUMP and MELANIA, those two meme coins, obviously it's captured the mind share outside of just crypto, right? It seems like in terms of volume. And I would say there's some value to that in people having captured mind share. I think on the flip side of it, where there's been a lot of negative backlash against it, saying this isn't serious, the president is embracing the worst part or the valueless part of the industry, it's grifty, it's a scam. I have a couple of things to say on that, which is first, I don't think we should care that much. Like, there are all different segments of this industry, and we all are here for different reasons.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Mind with CoinFund. You may be hearing my voice for the first time. That's because I'm making my debut as a host on the show. My name is Chris Perkins, and I'm president and managing partner at CoinFund. Today, I'm joined by my co-host and partner, Einar Braathen, who is also joining the show for the first time. Einar, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Chris. I'm Einar. I'm one of the partners here at CoinFund, and excited to be here. Chris, I think it's important to start off by telling the audience that today, on January 20th, 2025, we're recording on the date of President Trump's inauguration. This is the first ever pro-crypto president being sworn in. He's commencing a new era of crypto regulation in the US, and he has already made an impact in the crypto space just in the last couple of days with his launch of the Trump coin. Can you give the audience a brief summary of what's happened in the past few days and what's been leading up to this event?
So much to talk about, so we're going to get right into the interview, and I'm really excited to introduce my friend, crypto legal veteran, probably the most knowledgeable DeFi crypto lawyer and then some in the world, Rebecca Rettig. She's previously served as a chief legal officer at Aave, Polygon, and today is actually her very first day on the job at Jito. What a crazy and wild weekend we just went through. We saw the launch of the Trump token. We saw the subsequent launch of Melania, all in the Solana ecosystem. I know Jito was a big part of it. I think that the ecosystem processed over $50 billion worth of transactional volume. It was nuts. We had traders working around the clock trying to keep up with it. So anyway, wanted to give a warm welcome to Rebecca. Congratulations on the new gig. And how's the first day on the new job going?
Thanks so much for having me. It's great getting up to speed, but I spent a little time really understanding the business and what they do ahead of time. So feels super normal and natural, even after a really crazy weekend. So yeah, I'm excited to be here. We have a lot to talk about.
Einar, you want to kick it off?
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. I'm super excited to have you here. Maybe as a little bit of background, could you kind of briefly summarize Jito for us and kind of the important role that it plays in the Solana ecosystem?
Yeah. So Jito has built a few different products. I think you can sort of, if we're talking about it as a crossover, you can think of it as Flashbots, Lido, and EigenLayer, but all in the Solana ecosystem. They created a lot of software for validators in the Solana ecosystem that handle MEV, and particularly in a positive way. They've also created a liquid staking protocol that has been very positive, and then restaking as well. So lots of interesting products that have been out there that have already found really deep product market fit. Jito now, I think, is run by 93% of all validators on Solana. So it's doing really good work. And it did face congestion on the MEV side over the weekend. The block engine did. But I think everything in Solana faced some constriction. I think it was a really good stress test. And I think for where we are, not just in Solana, but just in blockchain and crypto in general, it was great to see like where we need to keep building and what we need to keep doing generally to make this system actually underlie everything that we're doing and we want to do long term.
Right. So you used a lot of words and acronyms that maybe some of the audience don't understand, like
Okay.
MEV, maximum extractable value. I think it's fair to say, correct me if I'm wrong, Rebecca, but like what Jito does, it's a core piece of infrastructure that allows a lot of the things within Solana to happen, including staking, which essentially drives yield to people who stake their tokens. But it's fair to say it's like an imperative part of that infrastructure that powers that entire ecosystem, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it makes everything sort of run more smoothly and work faster. You can think of it as proper ordering. JITO stands for just in time ordering. So you can think of it as ordering your transactions in a way that maximizes, hopefully, your best price or what you're actually hoping to achieve in the most efficient way.
Got it. So guys, Rebecca promised me some like really spicy takes, and so like ready to get into those. We had a wild weekend, as I mentioned previously, right? We have these meme coins that come out of nowhere. There's no intrinsic value. We had Trump, we had Melania. We're probably going to get Baron. And maybe Baron was launched. I may have missed it. What's going on with these meme coins on Solana? Like, do they matter? Like, and can you just give us your take on like what's happening, Rebecca?
Great question. So, you said something that I thought was so interesting, which a lot of people have said, which is these meme coins have no intrinsic value. And I think what you mean by that is they're not used for anything in particular, right? Like we just talked about staking and certain tokens can be used for staking. Like some tokens have lots of utility being used. I think the long-standing discourse over the past 6 to 9 months has been, well, what are these meme coins? They don't have any value and we don't even want them in this ecosystem. And I think there's been certainly a lot of loud voices saying that. Actually, do not agree with that. Because I think that meme coins are showing an evolution of where people do place value these days. And Chris, you and I have talked about this a lot. In having kids, you see where they place value. And so what we think of as markets and what types of assets are really important, I think deviates a lot from where we're moving as a society. And so I actually think meme coins are a great cultural indicator of where value is going to be and where it's been driving in many different ways. So I would not say that I think meme coins have no value. So I think that's the first part of it. The second part that everybody, obviously, that's all anybody's been talking about over the weekend. I know somebody who in DC who literally said to me, Saturday morning, everybody woke up and said, "What's Solana?" So obviously, it has captured mind share well outside of just the crypto world. And given the volume of transactions for both Trump and Melania, those two meme coins, obviously it's captured the mind share outside of just crypto, right? It seems like in terms of volume. And I would say there's some value to that in people having captured mind share. I think on the flip side of it, where there's been a lot of negative backlash against it, saying this isn't serious, the president is embracing the worst part or the valueless part of the industry, it's grifty, it's a scam. I have a couple of things to say on that, which is first, I don't think we should care that much. Like there are all different segments of this industry and we all are here for different reasons. I am definitely here to build valuable things. You guys as VCs, I'm sure are here to build, new paradigms that actually add value. When I was at Polygon, I created a database called the Value Prop, which was really meant to highlight use cases for good applications of crypto. And this may be, I don't know. I think it remains to be seen. But I think everybody has a choice. Like, just don't talk about it, right? Don't participate in it. But I actually don't think it's a terrible, as terrible as everybody has said. Um, I think insiders holding 80%. I think the possibility of dumping on retail, those are terrible. Those are just terrible parts of the industry that have been around prior to Trump anyway. And so what I actually hope this forces those of us who really want to see a lot of value come to this industry is in the next, let's say 4 to 6 months, that we really build something of rules, legislation, and really are pushing that because that's really where the industry needs to go to have good guardrails. The last thing I'll say is if you don't like this, you can blame Gary Gensler. Because if we had rules about disclosures, about who could hold what, and like, I don't think meme coins are necessarily securities, but I think if we don't have rules, right? If we had rules right now that we liked, we might be in a really different place and maybe wouldn't have seen this.
Yeah, I think that's like one of the few areas we got regulatory clarity under the last administration under Mr. Gensler. You know, he didn't think meme coins had any value. And by the way, as being I don't know. I tend to agree with you. I do think there's value. We should talk about it more. But like they were kind of dismissed, and they're like, yeah, they're definitely not securities. But how can you not take them seriously when there's like $50 billion of capital formation in a matter of hours, right? And so we're left with regulatory clarity in a place when like the previous administration thought there was no utility. But you try to bring in utility, and you're banished overseas or sued. Like it's just so wrong. But gosh, so much to unpack there. I don't. What do you think?
Well, I think maybe it could be to talk a little bit about memecoin and memecoin regulation, like kind of how should we think about this as an asset class from a regulatory perspective, Rebecca? I'm sure you have a lot of views on that, and kind of what does that kind of imply for the broader crypto industry and kind of the other types of coins out there?
Yeah, I mean, I guess meme coins would be commodities because of the, of all of crypto being classified as commodities, but they're spot and there's no spot authority yet. Chris knows all of this much better than I do for the CFTC. And so the question is, how or do we actually even want to regulate spot markets in the United States through the CFTC? And if we open it up to crypto, does it mean we're opening up the CFTC's jurisdiction to all spot markets, which extends to things like corn? So I think it's complicated. I think the thing we should all really be getting on board with, and that would be so easy to do, and that I hope the industry can pull together to do, is to come up with a disclosure regime that we all can just say, okay, let's do this for whatever the token is. I mean, unless it's like truly a security or something like that, so that there's a standard for disclosures. We have something in Abu Dhabi, we have something in Europe now through Mika. But if we can really come up with a disclosure regime in the United States that everybody can sort of sign on to as like best practice, I think that first step we should be taking.
So we literally before this podcast just got word that Caroline Pham is going to be the acting commissioner of the CFTC. You know, I've known her for many years, as you know. I think you pointed out a number of complexities. You can't just start like regulating spot markets. It's just not going to happen, and there's a lot of issues around doing so. The other thing is, like you mentioned, that 80% of the float was retained by the project. Don't we have disclosure since a lot of this technology is open source anyway?
We certainly have more information than we would have in traditional capital markets. And I think that's a great point. I thought about that over the weekend too, which is like we know where at least 80% of this is. And in some ways that gives you some disclosure of the risks. I think the other thing we sort of lose sight of is the whole point of markets is experimentation, right? I mean, that's in TradFi too. And we've seen it work and not work in TradFi as well. And so in some ways, we should be encouraging continued experimentation in markets, even if you feel like something is valueless.
Yeah, so like it's okay to take risks as long as you know what you're getting into and you're not, markets aren't being abused, manipulated. Oh, by the way, all of that regulation and law already exists, right? The CFTC doesn't regulate spot markets and commodities, but it does regulate and have the ability to enforce against any kind of fraud, manipulation, and abuse. And it feels to me like that's where we need to start.
I think that's right. I think the other piece of it is people are saying, well, if there was just one and not two, they would have felt better about it. But one, I mean, at least from what I've seen, it sounds like these were two totally different teams who launched them. And it goes back to what we said before. Don't participate if you don't like it. Like that is what markets are. I think the other piece that has people sort of concerned is that retail can touch this, right? And so there is this paternalistic feel of like, well, only certain people should be able to participate in capital formation and wealth creation that has underlied our traditional markets for a long time. I think that is very problematic. But I think on the flip side of it, that people lose sight of is like, the president did this. And like, so could somebody who grew up in the small town in the Midwest. And if they had a great idea for a meme, it could also catch fire and, run to 70 billion in 3 days too. So this wasn't limited to the president. Yes, he had a better platform, obviously. But like tons of people have launched meme coins and created generational wealth for themselves in a way they never could in the traditional capital markets.
100%. And when the president starts doing this, I mean, the regulatory de-risking is just so obvious. You also mentioned like, hey, just because a second one was launched. Well, I get people in traditional markets, always like, there's too many coins. There's just too many. Well, maybe we should cap the number of websites too. It's just ridiculous. But Einar, like you've been in the venture space for a really long time, putting on your venture hat in this environment, where do you see the opportunity?
I think we're seeing a big shift, right? At least I work a lot with the builders in the space. Those are the people that I'm really focused on. And if we've seen sort of over the last couple of years, a steady flow out from the US of builders that have been scared to launch tokens, don't know how to launch tokens, and would rather take risk in other jurisdictions, such as the UAE, Singapore, Hong Kong, these sorts of places. Now, with the election, everybody, including some of our own portfolio companies, are paying very close attention to what's going to happen in the US. Because the hope, and I think what everybody hopes in the industry, is that if you can get to some sort of clarity on the legal status, on kind of what is allowed and what's not allowed, if you can stop being harassed for being a crypto company in the US and actually be welcome, I think we will see a massive influx of onshoring of entrepreneurs and token launches over the next couple of years. I think the question I get the most from our entrepreneurs is really about time and what is going to happen, because that is something that's still unclear. I will hopefully learn more in the next couple of weeks, but people who are not directly physically in DC have very little insight to sort of, because time matters here. And people need to launch tokens in the next 6 months. And so they're anxious, can they do that? And if not, they got to look at alternatives. So Rebecca, maybe one for you is kind of what do you see changing, if you have any kind of concrete things, and what sort of timeline do you think we're going to see changes?
Great questions all around. So I do actually think we're going to see a lot of changes. I think one of the most underappreciated benefits or booms that the crypto community has gotten is that French Hill will be the chair of the or is now the chair of the House Financial Services Committee. He was the chair of the House Financial Services Committee subcommittee on digital assets. And I think he cares, as Chair McHenry did, about having and passing good crypto legislation. And then he named Allison Behuniak as his policy director for all of drafting and working on the Fit for the 21st Century Act. So there are people working to be able to push, I think, positive crypto legislation. I think in the first 6 months administration. I don't know if it'll look exactly like what we've seen before, and I've heard there are efforts from others to even draft new bills and find new sponsors. So I actually think more crypto legislation, and some that can actually be passed through both the House and the Senate. And then I am hopeful that writing rules in really productive ways, and maybe even thinking about what that looks like. And, we're filming in the midst of the inauguration, but what supposedly we're supposed to see later today is an unprecedented amount of executive orders, and some that may be dealing with crypto too. So it may be dealing with the formation of the Crypto Council, maybe some other things that come under David Sachs's remit as the AI and crypto czar. But I think we're going to start seeing directionally where people want to go. And I think the best thing for the industry will actually be to have rules, guardrails, legislation, and things like that.
Can you put a little more detail around that, Rebecca? So with your Jito hat on, and you mentioned disclosures previously, are there specific areas of rulemaking that you would like to see coming out of this? You talked about the SEC. We're hearing a lot more is going to head into the world of the CFTC. Maybe SEC focuses on capital formation, CFTC focuses on market regulation. But are there specific things you would like to see with that new Jito hat on?
Yeah, I think the Jito issues are maybe a little further down the line, just because it's far deep in the stack. We want to keep the stack itself be, super neutral, so have a lot of base layer neutrality. There will be issues that come up. I think the things that, from a Jito perspective, I care about are staking in ETFs. And I think that'll be an important issue that we see come out through the SEC probably in the next 6 months, but that's been somewhat controversial, but that I think is important. And then I think we have lots of work to do from a Jito perspective on making sure that there's base layer neutrality, and then also on questions about MEV, which I think is probably the thorniest policy question out there that hasn't really been tackled yet. But I think what the industry wants to see is, how do we launch tokens? Do we just do it? Or are there guardrails, or what are these? So I'm hopeful that there's some regime around that coming forward, and also how we deal with the exchanges. Because the US exchanges have truly been good actors in many ways and deserve to have some clarity around how to be able to run their business.
I know Einar knows the challenges that our founders face launching tokens firsthand. You want to unpack that, sir?
Yeah, I mean, it's very challenging to try to conform to standards when you don't know the standards. I think that kind of summarizes the question. We've seen significant change on our end, both in teams fundraising, where teams who are actively fundraising right now, who are on the fence about the token, now have really decided that, hey, we're actually going to include a token. And then we're seeing, yeah, as I said, a bunch of onshoring thing. I think one question, though, that everybody's grappling with right now is how much of a signal do I need in order to kind of go all in on being able to launch a token in the US, right? Is this Trump token the signal that, like, hey, if you moved out, if you're in UAE, you should start really kind of taking this serious and coming back, and like kind of so that, once this is passed, you're ready to hit go? Or do you think people should still take a more wait and see approach, or what else are there any other signals that we can kind of take away and incorporate that are stronger than this, than actual legislation being passed?
I mean, I certainly think projects want to launch tokens and are taking affirmative steps to do it. And I will say, I think it's challenging for lawyers in this space to say what to do next. I think there are some clear things, okay, that you shouldn't do, like don't participate in the listing process, but people are still doing that, at least outside the US. But it's hard to know, and teams are really, really bullish on launching tokens, including in the US. And I'll say, Lucas, who's the Jito CEO, was in DC on Friday, and one of the things he talked about is, like, we did spend time thinking about whether we should completely move offshore, and we're really happy because we're a US company with US founders and we want to build here. And so they're very happy that they've been able to stay in the US. And so, to your point, Einar, people are definitely coming back, or reopening offices here and things like that, which I think is positive for the economy and really what the point of all this is supposed to be.
Yeah, one of the things that drove us nuts in the last administration was the strategic ambiguity, right? And we would only find out how regulators would consider a token after an enforcement action, right? That's incredibly wrong. So essentially, a project would launch a token, things would be going great, and then the SEC would say, after it was launched, would say, no, we think it's a security now and you're in trouble. A better way would have been to say, hey guys, here are the rules, conform to them, and and that's how it should be. That's how thoughtful capital markets work. Rebecca, you talked about Chairman Gensler previously. Can you just unpack that a little bit further? What did he do wrong that
Yeah.
Chairman Atkins has the opportunity to get right?
Yeah, great question. And I was going to build off of what you just said about, like, people didn't know, what their tokens were until after the fact. And the under Chair Clayton, they did create this little division called FinHub, which was really meant to be an innovation hub at the SEC. And it was headed by Val Sapanic, who's still there and heading it. And so she both was under Chair Clayton and under Chair Gensler. And people did meet, let's say in 2017, with FinHub, looking to get guidance. And eventually, and this is no aspersions on Val or anybody at FinHub, but I think the edict came down likely from Chair Gensler, which was, once somebody comes in to meet you, every other division of the SEC needs to hear about it. So frequently what would happen is lawyers would bring in their clients to talk about, like, what should I do with my token? Can I launch it? What do you think of this project? And then shortly thereafter, they'd hear from the enforcement division. So, you'd go in, look for guidance, look for collaboration, and then you'd get shut down. And so I do think that this anti-innovation, this regulation by enforcement approach was really bad for the industry, not just from we wasted money on legal, we didn't know what to do, but what really happened is the good actors, as we've seen, especially at the end of this administration with the actions against the exchanges, when they had no guidance, they had all gone in and tried to make proposals for rules and things like that. The good actors were getting hit because they went in and the scams just went. And so you really did incentivize bad actors to come into the space because they could get in, get out, make their money, and then never hear from anybody ever again. So I think it was I think that was really, really unfortunate. I think, Gensler coming in was, just to go back to your question, Chris, he knew a lot about the industry. I was on a panel with him at the Cleveland Fed in 2017, where we were talking about crypto. And I mean, he wasn't overly friendly on that panel, but he certainly was like, at least understood the industry and seemed to be curious about it. And so I think it was part of this administration's overall anti-tech stance and virulent anti-crypto stance, what came out of the SEC. I mean, I would call it a reign of terror, honestly. And as a lawyer, all you would say to your clients, whether you're in-house or outside counsel, is like, you should just price in that you're going to hear from the SEC. You should just assume, right? It's only a matter of time. So I think that will change. But to the point sort of that you both, Chris and Einar, were making, is like, well, we don't know what to do next now, because we have nothing to go off of except some sort of like, which way is the wind blowing today?
Seems like a wasted opportunity. I don't know. For me, I'm just really excited that I hope that these office hours with Gary Gensler go away, the videos. I'm ready to go on to the next phase from there. And I'm sure hopefully Chairman Atkins can do a better job there. Einar, what do you think?
I think one question, and I would be curious in your take here. So obviously, this has been a huge boon for Solana. We've seen in the last couple of weekends, we have a couple of portfolio companies that provide infrastructure on Solana. They've seen a 50x influx. I think things have been down. People have had trouble, landing transactions. But at the same time, it seems to be in a much better place as infrastructure and chain from where it was, a couple of years ago. So, you obviously a ton of Polygon, a lot of these intimately and kind of the pros and cons of each. So curious maybe on your overall thoughts here, like, does this matter from a regulatory perspective? Are there going to be, are certain change you see protocol specific regulation on the horizon? And is there anything kind of that's more, Solana specific here or ETH specific versus other protocols in the future? Like, kind of how should founders think about this particular piece as they choose which ecosystem to kind of start their journey on?
No, I think it's going to be way too hard to do chain specific regulation, but I do think you need people from different ecosystems, at least with their voices in the mix, because how staking and validation works on Solana is very different than how it works on Ethereum. And so we just want to make sure that we create all purpose evergreen regulation that doesn't have to be continuously updated, and that always works. I will just say one thing, because there's been a lot of like, why did you go into a project in the Solana ecosystem versus staying in ETH, which I'd been in for a very, very long time. And I'll say a couple things on this, which is I had listened to a podcast with Anatoly maybe a year ago, and he was talking about his philosophy of what happened post FTX and how they supported builders and everybody who was creating applications on the chain. And I think that for me was a big turning point in just saying, like, these people are singularly focused. They have one North Star, just one. And all they do is focus on that. And so I think, and they've clearly been achieving that. Obviously, there were problems just with network congestion this weekend, but like and it was about 10% of daily volume on NASDAQ. So they're far from achieving their decentralized NASDAQ North Star, but that's all they think about. And that's all everybody in the ecosystem thinks about, right? And maybe the flip side of ETH is, well, you have so many voices, and that's what this is really meant to be about, and decentralization and stuff like that. But I will say that, there just is a very different perspective in the Solana ecosystem. Everybody's focused on that. But I don't think we're going to get network specific legislation.
So let me ask that slightly differently. Do you think with the new environment, all ships are going to rise with the tide? Or do you think a particular ecosystem is just going to hit it out of the park?
I don't think that's based on regulation. I think that's based on team and community and all the things that, we care about, transparency and stuff like that.
I think that's the right answer. Cool.
Yeah.
Einar, any other thoughts from you, sir?
Yeah, and just to kind of finish up on that point, maybe I was just curious, do you know any of the vectors that will be important for future legislation, right? Like one is like, hey, is there a test for decentralization, for example? Does decentralization matter in future legislation? Do we not know? Do we not care? Like, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I will tell you in the lawyers' chats that we have, that is a hot button topic because I think people really want to see decentralization codified in law. And some lawyers do because they're like, that's the distinguishing fact. And so if you're actually decentralized, we need a test for it because then you're not regulated anymore. But decentralization, I have always felt, is an operational question and a systems question. And it's hard to figure it out from a legal perspective. So we have to decide. One of the things I've been sort of beating the drum on for a long time, and certainly over a year, I put out a paper with two co-authors almost a year ago to the day to say, well, let's just like come up with a definition of control, right? Not custody necessarily, but control over user assets. And those types of projects where there is an identifiable individual who has like immediate and unilateral control should be regulated. And that's based on some other, papers that have come out in the industry too, and less about decentralization. So look, it's probably the flip side of it, but that fits more into what we've done with traditional regulation. Whereas if you have the ability to affect third-party assets, you actually need to take on and have some obligations that are well known and well documented versus how do we do a test for decentralization? Because what we saw in prior legislation were things like, well, are you doing marketing and are you, doing GitHub commits? And those things are so far outside of what's normally regulated and what people are typically regulated, except in things like, obviously marketing is regulated from a consumer protection standpoint, that I don't think we really want to bring that in, right? You don't want software developers to be thinking about like, well, should I make this GitHub commit today? It's going to make the project better. But if I do it, then I'm going to be in this strange cutoff and we won't be decentralized anymore. Like that doesn't incentivize sort of proper behavior, whereas the control piece does. And I will say it seems like a lot of lawyers are moving over to the view that control may be the right piece of it. Miles Jennings from A16Z just put out a piece maybe a couple months ago, maybe a month ago on this. And so I think everybody is sort of trending towards that. And it's something that we've seen, at least in the FinCEN guidance from 2019 too, that's really withstood the test of time.
That's a very interesting distinction. I think is an important one. And I'm just curious how that's going to play out in the future, right? Especially when it comes to protocol ownership and things like that. Because one thing that is clear about the Trump token is that that wallet owns 80%, right? So where is that threshold from when it gets, I guess, passing the Howey test or not on that? So curious to see that. But
I never want to hear about the Howey test again. I'm just not sure I think it really applies. And I think we've seen the SEC move away from it over the last 4 years to say, like, it's not the token, it's really the whole bundle of things around the token. And then you're like, well, what are those bundles of things? Like tweets? Are we supposed to be registering tweets like in any disclosure document filed with the SEC? Like, no. I mean, I think that there is a pretty clear way to demarcate when tokens are part of a package that relates to something that should be registered with the SEC versus not, but we just haven't done it yet.
So Einar touched on this earlier, and I know that you're Jito's lawyer and you're not here to give legal advice, but one of the things we're seeing is an absolute influx. Every company that I'm talking to, whether they're in Dubai or Abu Dhabi or in any other region, they're all trying to figure out their U.S. strategy. They're like, it's time. I'm coming on shore. What friendly advice would you give them as they seek to enter this market in this new regime?
I think set it up. I think do not necessarily think about creating an offshore foundation or things like that to like hedge. That's something we had to do for a while in a variety of different ways. Obviously, the EF part of it was really was much more ethos based and less regulatory back when EF was established, and then it became much more about regulation. But I would say move back here, move slowly, so you don't necessarily just do the old playbook, because the playbook's going to continue to evolve, and you may be able to issue tokens here legally. You certainly can do it in Europe under the new regime, and there's a lot being built out there. There are these really cool launchpad platforms, both Echo, Legion, and things like that are allowing you to launch in Europe. So I would say move back here and then move slowly. And I know we like to move fast here. So I don't mean slowly, like take 4 years to figure it out, but like maybe take 6 to 9 months to figure it out. And especially if you're going to be launching a token, launching a new product, I think we're going to see, I'm hopeful that we're actually going to see a lot of innovation around this. And I was on a call with a founder last week, and they said, like, whatever we do, we need to make it simple. Like, we're really allergic to things that are complicated. And like, literally, that's what we should be doing the next 4 years. Simple things, very clear, and it will go to this utility point. Like, I was thinking back to one of the first podcasts I did when I joined Polygon Labs, and I talked about like build useful things, like don't build things that give you 8th and APY. Like literally I said that, and I was like, "Ooh, I hope I don't get like killed by the industry." And now everybody's on this like, yeah, let's build useful things train. And so I think you should build useful things. If you want to launch a token, you should prepare to do it, but give yourself 6 to 9 months to just see how things play out and keep it simple.
So ICO 2.0 in the next few months, maybe.
I don't know about ICOs, maybe. I mean, certainly you can ICO in the EU now, and there are a lot of people who are doing it and raising tons of money. So certainly an option.
But not as much as Trump.
No, but I mean, look, I don't know who launched Pepe or what the team was or things like that,
Yeah.
but like there are definitely meme coins out there that were launched by non-famous people that have had really successful runs.
I think Shiba, is an example of that, and that's trying to turn it into a wider platform as well. So
Yeah. Yeah. So look, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity here. And one of the things I talked about in the last year, just a lot privately, was I wish we could set up, instead of having foundations offshore, why don't, if we need something like that, let's look at 501c3s, right? And setting up nonprofits here. Like one of the things you can check when you set up a 501c3 is it's promoting science and scientific development. And if that's something that we need to do, to have devcos separated from, whatever is promoting the ecosystem. And quite frankly, I'm not sure we're going to need that anymore in many ways. But if we do, let's have them in the US. That's like a huge miss, not having all these huge innovation hubs here, thinking about how to continue, development. So I'm hopeful that we'll see a lot in the US.
I have another question, which is going to change our topic a little bit. Basically, we've started to see huge activity in the AI agent space on crypto. We're seeing a couple of really exciting developments, some of them with, billion-dollar market caps already. And so if tokens weren't complicated enough from a legal perspective, you kind of start bringing in AI agents in the mix. What your latest understanding is there, if you've heard anything, if this is even something that people are focusing on, or if this is too cutting edge and it's like, hey, like we haven't even been able to wrap our head around.
I don't think from a legal standpoint, lawyers are starting to think about what it means. I will tell you, from a Jito standpoint, we think about it because the bots that are bundling are different than other validators who are bundling. And so you have to think, and we think about it a lot from a positive versus negative MEV perspective, because there are bots who may be bundling in a negative way. So you have to think about what to do there, because whoever processes a transaction is who's ever at the front of the line, which makes sense from a simplicity perspective, but it's obviously not what happens in the ETH ecosystem. So we do think of AI bots at Jito from that perspective and just how it can impact things. I think AI bots are going to have a huge impact on crypto, but I'm not sure I can really see where it falls out yet, nor do I know if I think it will fall out in a positive way. It may. I think we're going to see a lot more innovation, and I hope in a really positive direction in the next year or 2 years, just both with AI, but also with what people are building. And I know you guys have invested in a lot of really used companies building really useful things. So curious what your take is in terms of what you see your companies building.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, we've seen a couple of different trends, right? One has been huge, has obviously been around regulation of AI and training of AI. And so decentralized training that is open source has really been a big topic for a lot of people inside the crypto industry who believe in decentralization and open software. And so there's certainly a number of companies that are sort of trying to tackle that problem. Like I think about a year and a half ago, that was very non-consensus in the AI community. But I think in the last 12 months, we've seen a rapid change in sort of the viability of doing decentralized trading, which is quite exciting. I think the other piece that we're seeing from a legal perspective right now would be around agents and sort of sovereignty of agents, right? So, can an agent open up a bank account and make payments? We're certainly seeing people working on that. An agent be its own company with its own liability, its own limited liability. Who has the liability for an agent, especially kind of as things evolve over time? These are sort of the cutting edge questions I think that we're seeing right now and that we're sort of still grappling with. This is quite exciting.
There's also been this take. Sorry, I know you guys are the hosts, but I actually have a question for y'all, which is there's been this take like lawyers are going to be less important this time around, and or this moving forward in this administration. And I'm wondering what your take on that. And like, no prejudgment, you can tell me we will be less important, but what is your take on that in terms of how you think about it with your portcos and stuff like that? Are we all in a hangover where we say like legal's still really important because it was such a big part of the last 4 years? Or are we saying like, nah, I mean, you should just use lawyers like you normally would?
I think the role is going to change like many other roles. I've got a friend who's a litigator at a tip-top law firm, and he said he can deploy AI right now, and AI does things better than humans in certain instances, and maybe not so. It doesn't operate as well in other instances. But what's AI very good at? It's great at consuming large amounts of information in a very short period of time. And he said at this point, AI can already do the scraping and give better legal memos than associates can, simply because it can just process greater amounts of data. And now they're starting to ask, well, hey, how should I litigate this? And from their perspective, the AI isn't always right, but it oftentimes approaches the problem with a new vector and is making them think about different vectors of their approach. So like my take is that these are tools, these are technology. That technology needs to be overseen by individuals, maybe fewer individuals going forward. But I think the role is going to change. And then the bigger question is okay, how do I develop my junior people? How do I develop them to have the expertise? And in certain cases, the juniors understand, actually have more expertise because they can deploy technology more effective. But I think across the world, roles and responsibilities are going to change and expertise is going to shift, right? We didn't have content creators when I was a kid.
Just
Anyway,
you just didn't see them as much.
they were different, right?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, Rebecca, like not taking AI into account, I think there's a couple of things that might change, and for lawyers, and that would be if we can get some standard financing documents, that would certainly reduce the amount of lawyers needed for fundraising and make that more standard, right? Like there is no safe equivalent in crypto right now. And that means that every investment we do, each token warrant, each thing is kind of individually done for every deal. So that's like kind of one thing that would certainly change if we can get clarification. The other thing that might change is that we also do a very large amount of cross-border deals because people are scattered all over the world. And so if we do see, an onshoring or an influx and kind of coming back to the US, the complexities of those deals might also kind of diminish, right? So those are sort of two, I think, very tangible impacts from a deal perspective that might change for law firms moving forward.
I've got another thing I wanted to ask.
Oh, go for it. I was just going to say, my take is we will become like lawyers, even in house. Like, I don't know, I can't really name the Meta GC or the Google GC. And it's, that's sort of how it's always been. Like, you don't have these high profile lawyers frequently until you really have. Look, you did in, obviously, on the internet freedom stuff and others. And I don't think we're going to stop facing issues on the tech side. So you will still have like thought leadership, but you won't have I don't think, legal personalities in the same way that we always have, nor will they be needed, right? Some of it was really like you needed to do it as a business, was what was necessary for your business or to move things forward. But I think that things will wane or sort of become less public over time with lawyers, but maybe I'm wrong.
I'm on the other side of that. I think that lawyers are going to have to build their public brand to attract for BD. Like,
Oh,
look at people like you, John Deaton, and others. Like, you're going to have to differentiate with your edge, right? But I do want to pull it back, if you're okay, to the MEV question, maybe before
okay.
we wrap. For those listeners, like when I think of MEV, maximum extractable value, a lot of it has to do with the ordering of transactions. And we talked about this in the past, Rebecca. My head immediately goes to the Flash Boys and the way that the equity markets work today with Reg NMS, where people are racing to intercept those trades to maximize the value of their transaction. I don't think one of our thesis at CoinFund is that convergence is happening. We're going to bring these things together. How do you think this idea of MEV, which some people are like, oh, it's front running, it's this, it's that. How do you see this very fascinating, cutting edge topic evolving as a business line, and in the context of what we see in traditional markets?
I think that's a big question. I do actually think that as we come into this era where tech is just embraced more, even in the traditional financial world, that MEV is going to be a huge part of it and a huge player as far as how institutions think about crypto. And what's really strange there, then, right, is you have centralized actors who have an interest in seeing how the base layer runs and profiting from it. So that's like very, I think, complex to think about, whether you have institutions running validators or people running validators for institutions. So I think we're going to have to think about that. But to your point, and on your recommendation, as you know, I read Flash Boys, and everybody in crypto should be reading it. It's so fascinating, and such a great story. Look, I think this is how markets have evolved over time, where you have people who see parts of the market that can be, I'm going to say exploited, and I don't mean to use it in the negative way, but where there's really an opportunity there. I see a lot of that as institutions get to be even more savvy about crypto. That being said, I think it's going to take a little bit of time. So I think where institutions will go now is more like DeFi, because that still seems, different than having your own stable coin, or different than, if you're getting like on the edgier side of things. So that'll be the first place that they go. But I do think, as you and I have talked about, Chris, that there's an opportunity for education about MEV in institutions, because there is a convergence of how they think about markets and what actually goes on the transaction ordering side of things.
How can people reach out to you, Rebecca?
I'm on Twitter, and people can reach out to me there, Rebecca Rettig1. And from time to time, I'm still a little boomerish, so I'll check LinkedIn, so you guys can DM me there too.
Thank you so much for joining us, Rebecca. We really enjoyed having you on the show. That was Jito's Chief Legal Officer, Rebecca Rettig. For those of you who tuned in, thank you so much for listening. Let's keep the conversation going. Leave us a review and let us know what you thought. If you'd like to follow me on Twitter, my handle is @Einar_HB, spelled PINAR_HB. And Chris is at Perkins CR97, PERKINS CR97. Make sure you download where you get your podcasts, and we'll be back soon to dig deep on ideas of the blockchain space. Thank you.